I got some solder here. I have a soldering iron, and I'm going to take this soldering iron, I'm going to plug it in right here where the vacuum cleaner is usually plugged in. That's my big old vacuum down there. Alright, now then, here's a roll of wire that I can basically horse around with on this. See, I got the soldering iron plugged in and heating up. Something else you need to think about it. This is just a little pencil soldering iron. I've got a big old Win soldering iron that's got a gun to it, you know, over there. And this little pair of pliers right here will tighten that up. If this area in here where the soldering iron tip goes is not clean and doesn't have a really good connection, you're not going to be able to melt your solder. A lot of times on a gun type soldering iron, when you pull the trigger, you'll wind up in a situation where you don't have enough of a connection there where that soldering iron tip melts in there to get your act together. In other words, you pull the trigger and you won't have any soldering. Now this is very small wire. I can also do this on larger wire. I like to twist this right here and like that. Now, one of the things I came up with that I've talked about before is this, and let's get a little bit of shrink tubing put on there. This will work on your car or anywhere you happen to be working. I've got rolls of this solder over there, but these little pieces I'm just using for this demonstration. This arrangement here, Lyle actually makes something like this that's got a magnet on it and all that. But I created this thing back in the 90s when I was working at the Ford place, and I was always frustrated because I could never seem to get the wires to stay like I wanted them to. Now if you did what you wanted, like a lot of times when people are wanting to do a solder joint, they'll tin the wires and just let the stuff flow together. Well, in this particular case, see the way I've got this set up, I can basically take this. I need to make sure my soldering iron's hot enough. And, ooh, look at there, that's already good. Now what I like to do here, and I don't know if you can see that all that well, I like to stick the soldering iron and the solder to the wire at the same time. And when I stick the soldering iron and the wire to the wire at the same time as I do the solder, I wind up with a really nice looking solder joint. And this held it for me so that I didn't have to, worry about the shrink tubing getting. This also acts as a heat sink. If you've got a solder joint you're doing that's really close and you don't have room for your heat shrink so that it doesn't melt with the solder, this right here will kind of keep the heat away. It acts like a heat sink. Alright, so that is a good strong solder joint right there. Alright, so I can put this on there now, and then if I can find it over here. Wow, I've got a lot of junk up here, don't I? Oh, there it is right in front of my nose. Alright, I'm gonna turn on my torch, and I'm gonna do that right there. Now, make sure you remember to turn off the torch, because if you don't, you can set the house on fire. That is a strong solder joint right there. Now, another thing that you can do, if you're in a position, I'm going to reach down here right now while I'm thinking about it and unplug that soldering iron, because it doesn't need to stay plugged in. You see that little pencil iron didn't get too hot. Another thing you can do, if you want to get cocky, yeah, see, I'm just using these pliers to strip that instead of using regular pliers. Some people will just tie the wire together and solder it, and I've actually cut a little strand of wire too when I did that. But let's go ahead and get us another piece of shrink tubing. Shrink tubing is pretty good stuff because you don't have to worry about it unraveling and all that kind of hogwash. All right, I'm going to do this one more time on the other side of this wire. And if I hadn't stripped it so bad, right there, see, we'd have more wire to work with. But, so even if you're going to twist the wire together, this little homemade rig, and you can just get a piece of wire. It doesn't have to be one of those silly OEM hose clamps that you're doing that with. I paid $54 for that ratchet from the Mac Toolman. All right, we're going to do this a different way. All right, we're going to take this little torch here, and the trick is getting the wire hot enough to where the solder will flow. That's really a good enough joint. I'd like to put a little more on there. There you go. All right, see, now I've got a solder joint there. You need to be careful before you touch that because it's pretty darn hot. Now, I take my tool off of there, clip it back on. Uh-oh, see, I got a little issue right there. That right there, see that little spike, that silly thing would wind up messing up the, punching a hole in the heat shrink. So you can melt that off of there, like that right there, and turn that off. Okay. Yeah, I still got a little bit of a spike up there. I can kind of blunt it a little bit with them. Okay. Now then, there's that. See that little spike in the trying to come through the heat shrink tubing? Double check. When you set the torch, make sure it's not pointing at anything that's going to catch fire. See, I got two solder joints now. And that is a little thing, little fun soldering deal. The story behind this Mac ratchet was that I had a little S&K ratchet that I really liked. One of the service writers borrowed it. I didn't know where it went. He kept it long enough to where I needed to go get another one, so I went and paid 54 bucks on the Mac Tools truck for this one. And then after I bought this one and had already put my name on it, right there, I put RWM on it, right there with my little engraver. And he brought the other one back. I said, did you know I paid $54 for a new ratchet because you borrowed that one and didn't bring it back? It was one that I needed exactly this side. I had some other ones, but this one here I like. This is a Mac XR8 U3, I guess. Anyway, that's the story on that. So anyway, that's going to finish off my video for today.